Earlier this year, you did something extraordinary. You canceled $1 billion worth of existing ongoing grants to schools all across the country. And it's extraordinary because you didn't cut off new grants, you cut off existing grants. But did you worry about what your decision would do to these kids where you've ripped away their counselors and social workers literally in the middle of the program? Do you worry about what's going to happen to those kids in Northwest Connecticut and kids all across the country who have lost access to their trusted adults?
I certainly worry about mental health for children and adults all across the country. I certainly do.
I guess I'm asking specific. You must have weighed this. I assume you weighed this when you made this extraordinary decision to shut down $1 billion worth of mental health programming for kids. Did you worry about what you would do to those specific kids?
Well, what we have to do, I think, and that's what our simplified funding program is going to do, is to put programs into a single grant that's going to the states to be determined how that money can be best used.
But how did you weigh the impact? I'm asking about this specific decision. How did you weigh the impact that, again, these kids in Northwest Connecticut, they literally say, this adult is the most important adult in my life. And you made a decision to shut down that program. And this can be replicated all over the country.
Welcome back to Right View Nation, where we expose the truth the mainstream media won't touch, defend American values, and stand unapologetically for our children, our Constitution, and our future. Today, we need to talk about a chilling and disgraceful decision made by the Department of Education. This isn't just another bureaucratic blunder. This is a calculated assault on our children, our schools, and the very principle of local governance. So sit down, patriots, because you're going to want to hear this. Not long ago, Republicans and Democrats actually worked together, a rare moment of unity, to pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Whatever your thoughts on that bill, one thing was clear. It aimed to address a growing mental health crisis in our schools. It provided billions in funding, real money, to get counselors, therapists, and social workers into schools where they were desperately needed. So what happened? Earlier this year, the Biden administration's Department of Education did the unthinkable. They didn't just halt new grants. No, they canceled nearly $1 billion in existing, ongoing mental health grants. Let that sink in. These weren't ideas on paper. These were programs in motion, counselors working, kids healing, lives being changed. They ripped the rug out from under these programs midstream. In both red and blue states, children lost the only trusted adults they had access to in their schools. And for what? Let's take one example, Northwest Connecticut. There, a mental health program was supporting kids in crisis. They did a survey, asked the kids directly, if you were in a mental health crisis, who would you go to? You know what every single one of those kids said? The counselor funded by that program. That same program, now gone. Thanks to an unelected bureaucrat's pen stroke. Let me ask you this. What kind of government sees a child identify their trusted counselor as their lifeline and says, let's take that away? I'll tell you what kind, a cruel, ideologically driven, authoritarian government. One that prioritizes political correctness over compassion. One that sees children not as individuals, but as pawns in a game of social engineering. So why did they do this? Oh, you're going to love this. They cited civil rights violations. But when pressed to explain, they couldn't point to a single, specific violation. Nothing. Just vague insinuations, bureaucratic buzzwords, and more empty rhetoric. The truth.
And thank you to both of you for being here today. A few years ago, we worked really hard across the aisle to pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, a bill that made changes in our gun laws, but in large part because it was a real priority for my Republican colleagues, also included billions of dollars in funding for school-based and children's mental health. Earlier this year, you did something extraordinary. You canceled $1 billion worth of existing ongoing grants to schools all across the country. And it's extraordinary because you didn't cut off new grants, you cut off existing grants. So in states all across the nation, blue and red, there are now mental health programs for kids that are shutting down, and kids who have been relying on really important adults in their life, these counselors and social workers, are losing access. You know Connecticut very well. You shut off a program that provides mental health resources to kids in crisis in Northwest Connecticut. When they did a survey of these kids and asked the kids who are in this particular program who the one adult was who they would go to if they were in mental health trouble or in response to a trauma, every single one of those kids in that program named the counselor funded by this program. You've shut that grant down. When those kids show up to school next fall, that trusted adult will not be there. You've told this program, as well as all the other programs, that the reason is they're violating civil rights laws. This program has no idea what you mean by that. And I guess I just ask you this. I'm sure you had to weigh, factors in making this decision, but did you worry about what your decision would do to these kids where you've ripped away their counselors and social workers literally in the middle of the program? Do you worry about what's going to happen to those kids in Northwest Connecticut and kids all across the country who have lost access to their trusted adults?
I certainly worry about mental health for children and adults all across the country. I certainly do.
I guess I'm asking specific. You must have weighed this. I assume you weighed this when you made this extraordinary decision to shut down $1 billion worth of mental health programming for kids. Did you worry about what you would do to those specific kids?
Well, what we have to do, I think, and that's what our simplified funding program is going to do, is to put programs into a single grant that's going to the states to be determined how that money can be best used.
But how did you weigh the impact? I'm asking about this specific decision. How did you weigh the impact that, again, these kids in Northwest Connecticut, they literally say, this adult is the most important adult in my life. And you made a decision to shut down that program. And this can be replicated all over the country. How did you weigh the impact on those kids? It's a really cruel thing to do to those kids. So did you think about the impact on those kids?
Well, I certainly can't evaluate every particular program in every school district across the state. There are some areas that need mental health more than there are others. And there were programs in the mental health program that did deal with DEI and with gender issues, et cetera. And it wasn't just about the kind of things that you're talking about. So in totality, as we look at mental health grants across the country, we have to make sure that those programs are being used to serve best in those communities.
Yeah.
So, therefore, a governor or a principal or a state superintendent would have the best information relative to what is needed in that particular state.
Yeah, we know what we need in Northwest Connecticut, and what we need is for the federal government not to rip funding away from these kids in need in the middle of the service program.
Or to better allocate the dollars you have and provide those professionals across the state that can handle it.
Let me ask you another question. Obviously, we're trying to understand what the Department of Education is doing with respect to the threats you've made against institutions of higher education. In the letter that you sent to Harvard demanding that they make certain changes, you told them that they had to end all of their diversity programs, but that they had to institute viewpoint diversity. That doesn't seem to make sense. How do you tell them to end all their diversity programs? And we assume that this is a mandate that you will make of other schools as well. How do you ask them to end diversity programs while instituting viewpoint diversity? Those seems to be totally contradictory.
No, the diversity programs that we've asked and demanded to be eliminated were the DEI, where they were those programs actually were pitting one group against another.
Isn't viewpoint diversity a diversity program?
A viewpoint diversity is exchange of ideas that's actually better, absolutely. Because Harvard only has 3%, by its own numbers, 3% conservative faculty. Do you think they are allowing enough of viewpoint diversity through that teaching on campus?
Where in the statute does it give you the ability to cut off federal funding for a university based upon your decision, your determination that they don't have viewpoint diversity? Can you cite to a statute, an authority that Congress has given you to micromanage the viewpoint diversity of a college?
Well, certainly now let's back up.
Well, no. I think that's really important.
I'm going to answer your question.
Can you cite a statute? Because you can't cut off funding for universities unless you have a statutory authorization to do so. So what statute gives you the right to tell any university that they have to have a certain mixture of viewpoints?
So here's what happened with Harvard.
No, it's a pretty simple. I don't mean to provide a being hostile.
Well, I have to give you some.
I think you have to
some
cite the
background.
statute.
The statute's Title VI. These were civil rights violations. That is why we filed a case and defunded or stopped the funding for a while for Harvard, as well as we did Columbia. And in that conversation with them, we talked about different things that they should do coming back to the table to make their programming better. The president of Columbia absolutely indicated, as well as the president of Harvard, that they needed to do things on their campus to eliminate anti-Semitism. That was kind of the crux of what brought us into talking to the different universities. And then we sat down with them to say, okay, these are other issues that you need to address on your campus because you do receive federal funding.
I'm
and
well
under
over,
federal funding, if you are breaking the law,
I'm
which
well
they
over my
did
time,
under Title VI.
I don't understand
I've
any
answered your
conception
question.
of
It was
civil
Title
rights
VI.
law to give you the authorization to micromanage viewpoint diversity on campus. That's not authorized under the civil rights title provided to you by the United States Congress. Thank you very much.
These grants were pulled because some of the programs dared to not align with the radical left-wing agenda. The department said some of these programs touched on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and gender issues. So instead of fixing that with accountability and oversight, what did they do? They torched the entire thing. Shut it all down. Left children abandoned. This isn't justice. This is ideological warfare disguised as policy. Now let's pivot to another grotesque overreach, the Department of Education's attack on higher education. They sent letters to Harvard, Columbia, and others. Not about academic standards, not about campus safety, but about something they call viewpoint diversity. Now listen, I'm all for diversity of thought. God knows universities today are left-wing indoctrination factories. But here's the thing, you don't fight tyranny with tyranny. You don't get to say, shut down DI programs, then turn around and say, now you have to implement our preferred ideological balance, all while threatening federal funding. Because that's not liberty, folks. That's government-controlled thought. And last I checked, the Constitution doesn't grant unelected federal agencies the power to dictate what professors should think, say, or teach. And when asked point blank, what law gives you the right to do this? They stumble and say, Title VI. Give me a break. Title VI was created to fight real discrimination, based on race, national origin, and color. It was never meant to be a weapon for social control or a tool for enforcing ideological quotas. They're using civil rights laws as a cover to micromanage thought, defund dissent, and consolidate power. This isn't about inclusion. It's about control. Patriots, what we're seeing is not just incompetence. It's not even just corruption. It's a deliberate strategy to centralize power, silence opposition, and fundamentally reshape our institutions, from kindergarten to college. It's the same authoritarian mindset that told parents to sit down and shut up at school board meetings. That calls concerned moms domestic threats. That pretends to care about children until those children stop fitting into their narrative. Let's call it what it is, child abuse by bureaucracy. Now more than ever, we must fight back. Not with violence, but with vigilance. We must flood the phones of our representatives and demand accountability. We must attend every school board meeting, every town hall, every public hearing. We must demand that our schools serve families, not ideologues. And we must vote like our lives and our children's futures depend on it. Because they do. If we don't stand now, then the America we know, the America of faith, family, freedom, and common sense, will vanish. Here at Right View Nation, we don't whisper. We roar. And we will keep calling out the hypocrisy, the overreach, and the radical agenda that is corroding the foundation of our republic. To the bureaucrats in D.C., listen up. You don't own our kids. You don't dictate our values. And you damn sure don't control our speech. We see what you're doing, and we're not backing down. So if you believe in America first, if you believe in parents' rights, and if you believe that the government works for us, not the other way around, then hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video. Because now is not the time for silence. It's time to rise. God bless you. God bless our children. And God bless the United States of America.